Okay, enough talk about Grand Fondos and how I did or did not succeed. Let's talk about some fun riding that I did last year. Mainly the BikeMS ride in Tennessee, the bike to Jack and back, to be specific. Hey there, I'm just another John Q. Public on a bike, a Joshua Q. cyclist, if you will. I'm one of who knows how many out there who love to ride their bike, try to go fast, and want to challenge themselves on the bike. The one constant that I have had since about 2008 is my participation in the BikeMS rides. Throughout the year, I'll do other organized charity rides, but the BikeMS one is the ride that I actively fundraise for. All the other rides are important and meaningful, but for those, I pay the registration fee and I do the ride. For BikeMS, in addition to the registration fee, there's a minimum that each rider needs to raise in order to do the ride. And for this ride, I don't mind asking people to donate for one really big reason. BikeMS is a fundraiser for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. The MS Society is the prime organization that supports individuals living with MS, doctors helping treat people living with MS, and research into finding a cure to MS. Now, unlike cancer, where there are several organizations for cancer research or in supporting people with different types of cancer, the MS Society is the only organization for the population of people living with MS. This one organization is the front line in the efforts to provide help to people, but it's also the main funder for research into the treatment, medication, and everything else for MS. So, the BikeMS events are some of the biggest sources of income for the organization in order to fund that research and provide that support and generally try to make life a little better for those living with MS. So the money that I help raise goes to help make the world a little better place for the MS community. Having a more direct impact on the community with my efforts is important to me. Each year, my goal is to raise not just the minimum amount needed to do the ride, but to meet the donation requirements to receive a BikeMS jersey for that specific ride. And yeah, I can hear some of you going, oh, you're just wanting that extra money to get free swag to show off. And you know what? I can't argue with that. There are BikeMS rides across the country for most of the year, but there's only one a year that I can participate in. Well, I can participate in as many as I want, but I'm only going to pester my friends and online community for donations for one ride a year. I mean, I know there are limitations to what people can do, but I don't want my raising awareness for the cause to be limited to just one weekend a year. So, thanks to the support of generous friends, I've been able to amass a collection of BikeMS jerseys. And pretty much every time I go for any kind of bike ride, I wear one of those jerseys. Not only am I wearing a jersey that's screaming BikeMS, or wear t-shirts, I also have either bought or painted bikes that are blue and orange, the colors of BikeMS. So that every time I'm out on the bike, I am a rolling billboard for the organization and the cause. Hell, even my road shoes are blue and orange. I have fully embraced the color scheme in my cycling life. And my glasses life. When I'm out on the bike, be it commuting, going for a fun spin, or doing challenge rides, I want people to notice the colors and the cause. So yes, I'm trying to get as many jerseys as I can in the effort to always be that rolling advertisement for the MS Society. Well, why is any of this important to me? Well, my mother and my brother are both living with MS. This organization, and in turn this series of bike rides, is personal for me. For as long as I can remember, my mom has had MS. And for a large portion of that time, it wasn't noticeable. And if you didn't know, you'd never be able to tell. It was because of her MS that her bike had their reversed brakes, or the European style, done. Remember I talked about that many episodes ago. Anyway, as for my brother, it's a more recent development. He was sick with COVID a few years ago, and while working with a doctor on some other medical issues, they diagnosed him with MS. We don't know exactly how long he's been with MS, because as a cook, he's always on his feet, and he just thought that some of the sensations and numbness he was experiencing was all part of the job, and just continued on thinking nothing about it. So this ride is impactful for me. I ride for and because of people that cannot. I started off these by doing the Virginia BikeMS ride. And during that, I was able to wrangle in some coworkers who were part of a gym group I was a member of. We did that ride for a couple years, and then things kind of dissipated. After that, I was riding in the Maryland BikeMS rides and did several of those, the Chesapeake Challenge. One year, I decided it was time for a change, and I wanted to do a BikeMS ride in a different state. This would give me an opportunity to have a little different experience and new landscape to enjoy while pedaling for the cause. I decided, why not do the ride where my parents are, in Oregon? What better way to help raise money and awareness for a cause that involves my mom in it than to do it where she lives? Yeah, that was the beginning of 2020 when I signed up for that ride, and we all kind of know what happened in 2020. There's no reason to rehash those fun times. But I didn't let a pandemic stop me from my mission of raising money and awareness. The organizers for the ride still hosted a virtual ride and encouraged people to do some sort of ride indoors or outdoors to still be part of the community in the ride. For my part, I did the regular 2 days, the first at 100 miles and the second doing 60 miles, as I would have done if I was in Oregon for this. The following year, I was still determined to be in Oregon and do the MS ride, and fortunately this time it was all able to come together. Now, granted, that year the crowd was much smaller and the celebrations and festivities were pared down substantially, but it felt amazing to be at the start line with my parents there and helping get my mom involved as a cheerleader at the finish line. The ride was only 1 day that year, again, keeping with things limited and safe, but it was no less meaningful. Flying across the country to spend a few days with my parents and then doing the ride pretty much set in stone that I was going to start doing more rides in other states. I had a new goal, and that was to see how many states I could do an MS ride in. So in 2022, I signed up for the Delaware ride. I raised the money, drove up, and spent the weekend basically cycling all over the state for 2 days. That ride reminded me a lot of the Maryland ride, with the after-ride activities and the food. The various teams would be grouped together and hanging out at the finish line, and there was a DJ playing, but then everybody kind of dispersed and went their ways until the next morning, when kind of only the crazy riders were doing the second day, especially the crazy riders that did the 100 miles the first day and then were doing the 50 the day after. I mean, who would want to do that, right? The Maryland ride is a big loop on the first day and then a smaller loop the second day. Whereas in Delaware, you ride to a point, stay the night, and then ride back to the start. So when you were done after the first day, you parked your bike, hopped on a shuttle to whichever hotel you booked, and there you go. In the morning, back on the shuttle you go, hit the road, cycle back to the beginning, get in your car, there you go. Not a lot of fanfare to it, but it's a much smaller ride on the second day, so it kind of matched the crowd. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed the ride and the scenery was beautiful. Come 2023, I was looking at all my options and again was trying to figure out what state I was going to do the ride in. This time around, I decided to get a little extra crazy and I registered for the ride down in Florida. I like the idea of the Florida ride for one really big reason, or small reason. No hills. Yeah, the Florida ride was the flattest ride I had signed up for, and I was thrilled. Just get on the bike, ride along the coastline for the most part, and get to the end point. I know I should ride the hills and challenge myself a bit. I've talked about that a lot. But I really like the idea of just going all out on the flats and not worrying about what was just around the bend. Just like the Delaware ride, you bike out to the end point, and then the second day you're biking back to where you parked the day before. Now, unlike the Delaware ride, the first day lands you at the hotel on the beach. No need to hop in a shuttle or anything like that. You get off the bike, you park it, you go inside and check in. I like that because you didn't have to worry about shuttle schedules and when they were coming and going. I get to the end of the ride, park the bike, have some food, go up to my room, and it's done. Easy, easy. Because the end of the day is at a hotel, the festivities were a little more involved and they lasted longer and it was better attended. It was more of a party. The second day, like most rides, had a smaller participation, but despite it being smaller compared to the previous day, it seemed more than the other rides that I've done. Was the percentage of returning riders the same as other rides, but since we were dealing with a larger pool of people, it made it look like a bigger turnout? I don't know, honestly. But it was still nice to see a crowd of excited and enthusiastic cyclists hit the road as one big group. Jumped to 2024 and it was time to find a new location and I had no idea where to go. I'd received several suggestions from fellow riders both on the previous BikeMS rides and online through a BikeMS Zwift club that I'm a part of. I had a friend recently move back to Tennessee, and so I decided to give that ride a look, see how close he lived to the start point. Packaging in a visit and a ride sounded kind of like a great extended weekend. And fortunately, he lived pretty close to the start point. So, Tennessee, bike to Jack and back it is. There wasn't crazy climbing, but there was new landscape to explore, so what's not to like? This ride, like Delaware and Florida, is a ride out to a point, stay the night, and then ride back the next day. Like Delaware, at the end of the ride, we need to hop on a shuttle bus to get to our respective hotels. I got to the start point, pinned on the numbers, and waited for my turn to cross the start line and hit the high, happy road. All I can say about the route was that it was a beautiful journey through the Tennessee countryside. As is the case with pretty much any other MS ride, we were out of the way from busy locations and our course sent us down back roads and very rural areas that get lost to all but the local people. For those areas where we did have to worry about traffic and intersections, we not only had the assistance of local law enforcement, but there was also a motorcycle club that was patrolling the course, keeping an eye out for the riders. I will admit, the first time I saw a small pack of motorcyclists go past, I didn't really think anything of it. But they did keep a very wide berth from us riders and just kind of kept going down the road. It was only when I got to an intersection that I saw they were blocking any oncoming traffic until we had safely rolled through. They were even blocking it when it was just one person, like if it was just me coming through. After I would leave the intersection, they sometimes hop back on to get to the next junction point, and sometimes they'd hang back just to make sure it was clear for any riders that were behind. This is a level of attention to the roads and traffic that I hadn't really experienced before, and I gotta say it added another layer of comfort and confidence to the ride as a whole. I mean, I'm used to having police at some of the intersections, but this was pretty much at every intersection. The Tennessee MS ride is 2 days of 70 miles each day, so there wasn't a century day, but that also means each day ends a little earlier than what I'm used to. Rolling up to the finish line at the Jack Daniel's distillery, which was the finish line for the day, I had more time to relax and take in the afternoon. I parked and checked in my bike and grabbed some lunch before heading to the shuttle buses to get to my hotel. A quick drop off at the hotel, and I was able to get cleaned up and take a nap before it was time to board the bus again to go back to the distillery for dinner. And this was something I wasn't expecting. See, I'm used to being fed at the end of the ride, but I'm not used to also being provided dinner after the fact. And this dinner was catered by Jack Daniel's. It was damn good too. So I went to it. I wasn't expecting there to be a big crowd because people always peel off and go home or find other things to do. So I figured those of us there for dinner were kind of the stragglers and the visitors. Boy, was I wrong about that. Aside from dinner, there were presentations, conversations, information sharing, musicians, you name it. This wasn't just a dinner of a bunch of cyclists riding for a cause. This was a community gathering. And while I was an outsider to the location and the people, I was a part of the bigger BikeMS family. And felt like I belonged there. This was way more than just a getaway for the weekend cycling orphans grouping. This was a community celebration for what we were doing and why. Usually arriving at the end point, when all the other riders would scatter to their group pop-up canopies, we go from being one collective powerhouse on the road to a gathering of small teams. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but it does leave the individual riders kind of on their own. But this Tennessee ride, we were all one large group from beginning to end. And as a solo rider, I gotta say it felt great to feel more involved in that community. Dinner and entertainment done, it was time to head back to the hotels for some sleep and do the reverse route on Sunday. And not to sound like a broken record or repeating myself, but the second day was pretty much like the first day. Beautiful weather, amazing roadside support from the MC helping out, well-stocked rest stops, and a lot of great people out on their bikes having conversations and meeting each other and just having a good time. I linked up with a couple different groups and we had some mini pelotons going down the road and giving each other a little draft to tuck in and get a break from the wind. Arriving at the finish line, there were celebrations. People who had finished earlier were out and cheering on the incoming riders. I never really got the mindset from others of, okay, I'm done, let's jet. I mean, I'm sure there were those who had that approach, but there were even more who were all about hanging out and being part of the crowd until it was time for the crowd to eventually scatter to the wind. I've ridden in BikeMS rides across the country, and I plan on doing even more to experience what more states have to offer with their BikeMS rides. But I have to say that the Tennessee ride was an amazing experience from start to end. Sure, there are elements that are just like some of the other locations, but there are also some aspects that I think some places could kind of take a lesson from. Again, no MS ride has been bad, and they have each had elements that I have loved, and I would recommend any of the locations that I've done to someone looking to give it a go. I would say, though, that Tennessee would be an amazing introduction to the BikeMS world and community as a whole. And here we are now, 2025. What state do I go to now for BikeMS? And I'm looking around to see what rides and cycling adventures to also possibly toss some extra time and attention to. Of course, the ever-present struggle is trying to figure out how to juggle the adventures and BikeMS rides and everything else going on in one's life without feeling overwhelmed. But you know what? I think that discussion's going to have to wait until next time. Thanks for joining me on this cafe stop. Let's do this again real soon.